Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side, the video series. My name is Ken Cousin. I have a newsletter called Tales from the Jar Side, and this is your opportunity to hear it basically read to you instead of having to read it. If you're interested, great. If not, there are other videos on the YouTube channel, mostly technical in nature, but a couple of musical ones as well. At any rate, let's get started. So the title this week is Tales from the Jar Side, a Groovy Podcast, finally, Gradle in IntelliJ, Ignoring Java 20, UConn Basketball, I Wrote a Bad Joke, and the usual assortment of tweets and toots. The subtitle is, After my failed attempt at growing vegetables this year, I've decided to become a music producer because now I have a ton of sick beats. Uh-oh, didn't get it ready again. Instant rim shot. There you go. You know, if I judge by my wife's reaction to the newsletter, these subtitles have not been up to their usual standard lately. They're not getting the laughs they used to. All I can say in my own defense is they're not mine. I just collect these gags around the internet and throw them in there. I guess I'll have to work a little harder at it. At any rate, let's go on. Welcome, fellow jarheads, to Tales from the Jar Side, the Cousin IT newsletter for this time the week of March 26th through April 2nd, 2023. This week I taught the third week of my Spring and Spring Boot in 3 weeks course for the O'Reilly Learning Platform. I also did a Groovy Podcast, and though I didn't turn out to have time to talk about it in this newsletter, I taught a session of my friend Jonathan Johnson's Cloud Native Development course at Trinity College. That was a lot of fun. Regular readers of and listeners to, and of course video viewers of, this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than the average newsletter reader or listener or viewer. If you wish to become a jarhead, there's a subscribe button on the newsletter, but there's also a subscribe button on the YouTube channel. First section, the Groovy Podcast reemerges from the depths. It's been a while, a long while actually, since we did a Groovy Podcast, but we finally got our schedules aligned and there were some things going on, so we got together an episode with Graham Roche and Jen, I think it's Weezy from OCI. OCI is the company that funds a lot of Groovy and Grails development. They do a lot of consulting work and training in that area. The occasion that got us to try to put something together was that sometime during February was the 15th anniversary of Grails 1.0. I remember that. I was not actually involved, but I was learning Grails, and I remember them finally going 1.0, and I had Graham's original book. Graham was the head of the project back then, and he wrote a book called The Definitive Guide to Grails, and I think he wrote the book mostly on Grails 0.4, as I recall. And I have an autographed copy somewhere. I have to go dig it up. Any rate, so I know that anniversary was several weeks ago, but it took a while to get our schedules to line up, as often happens. So I'm just glad we were able to do it. So as I mentioned, Graham was both the head of the Grails framework from the beginning, and then a little bit later, he helped form the Micronaut team. So he's been involved in 2 of these major frameworks. Jen was a co-worker of his at OCI, and they, again, as I mentioned, funded a lot of development. Also, they have created a couple of foundations. These Grails Foundation and the Micronaut Foundation, both are consortiums that help fund the development of the open source projects, keep them going, have an advisory board, all that kind of silliness. I know about that one because I'm actually on the Grails advisory board for what it's worth. We meet a couple of times a year, I think once a quarter roughly, and talk about what's coming up and what we suggest, what we're seeing in the marketplace. At any rate, it was a fun time talking to Graham. I always like talking to Graham. He's a very interesting person. One thing I'll mention is that I asked him about a rumor I'd heard, which was that, Grails, you probably are aware, was a response from the Java community to the massive event that was the creation of Ruby on Rails by David Heinemeier Hansson. And Ruby on Rails I always often compare it to the comet or the asteroid, I suppose, that hit the earth and wiped out the dinosaurs. That's the feeling we had as Java people, is suddenly you could do everything in 20 minutes. I mean, it was very, very impressive. The problem was you had to do everything in Ruby. Now, Ruby's a nice language, but a lot of companies had significant investments in Java, and they didn't just want to throw that away. So the question was, could you bring Ruby on Rails like rapid prototyping and productivity into the Java world, especially if you're willing to rely on existing projects like Spring and Hibernate and so on? And that's what Grails did. Well, the rumor was that the original name of Grails was going to be Groovy on Rails. And no less a person than DHH himself, David Hannemeyer Hansen, sent an email saying, no, you can't do that. Rails is the name of my framework. So they said, okay, we'll shorten the name to Grails, and that's what it was forever after that. Pretty amusing, I think. That also is consistent with everything we've learned about DHH since then. We had a really good discussion. It was a lot of fun. If you see here, let me actually go to the YouTube channel, and you can see there is, in fact, here a Groovy Podcast YouTube channel, which is where we have most of the podcasts available. It's also sent out and is available. The audio is available through Podbean on many different podcast players, so there's not a problem there. We also have, as I recall, as part of the No Fluff Just Stuff website, they were willing to host a Groovy Podcast part. It still has the old notes here saying that it's me and Baruch Sadigursky, but they should have the most recent one, and they do. So this is an alternative place that you can get access to the podcast, and there's even a subscription link that points to Podbean and everything. So if you're interested, you're welcome to it. All the many, I guess, I don't know if all of, but most of the previous episodes are in the archive there as well. I'll put that link in the description. Okay. Next section. I made another video for the Tales from the Jar Side YouTube channel. This time it was a technical one, and it's one of the shortest ones I've made. This was one of those cases where I solved a problem that I'd been having and thought, I don't know if this is worth a whole video, but I didn't know anybody else who knew about it. And I thought, there may be some people who are interested in this. So I put it together. It's got the very awkward title, Fix Your Gradle IntelliJ Code Assist in One Step. So what I did is, it's actually easy enough to explain. The basic idea is that if you load a Gradle build file into IntelliJ, you see how this is a little snippet of code from Grails, and IntelliJ is identifying the task here as an instance of the task interface, or a class that implements the task interface. It doesn't realize that this is in fact a test task. The name is not enough for it to understand that. So because it's a task of type task and not one of type test, it doesn't recognize the use JUnit platform method or the max parallel forks property, although that one's not getting a warning in there. And it turns out that if you switch back to the eager configuration mechanism, where you just use the word test instead of saying task.named, then of course it does. IntelliJ does recognize that, oh, this is a test task, and therefore these things are all nicely highlighted because it understands them. Well, that unfortunately is encouraging people to go back to eager configuration and configuring this task, even if you don't plan to run any tests. And of course, the Gradle people would prefer you go with this, which is lazy configuration. This is like saying if the user has asked for a task named test as part of the execution, then do this configuration. Well, it turns out there's an overload of the named method that takes a second argument, which is the class. And and I didn't even think about it, just add the argument. Now, what triggered this for me, by the way, is that in the Kotlin DSL, they use a reified generic type. And I looked at that and went, wait a minute, Kotlin using reified generics usually happens when there's a second argument in the Groovy DSL that has a class reference in it. So I tried it, and it turned out it was there. So I kind of got lucky. This was based on the previous video I'd made, which used both Kotlin DSL and the Groovy DSL. And that's what made me realize this. So it's a very easy fix. And now I plan to add it to my Gradle build files from now on. Okay. Next section. What about Java 20? Now, you may know that Java 20 was released on March 21st, which was disappointing. My sense of symmetry wanted Java 19 to come out on the 19th, but it came out on September 20th. Java 20 should have come out on March 20th, but no, it came out on the 21st. And I said in the newsletter that Java 21 is officially scheduled to come out on September 20th. I think I saw a tweet today that suggests it's actually going to even be the 19th. So it's off by 2 days there instead of 1, but so be it. That little symmetry reminded me of this classic image that you may have seen, the one with the School of Medicine, and the section that says obsessive compulsive disorders is, of course, a little out of sync here, a little maladjusted, just to drive those people crazy, I suppose. So the caption on this image is always, "Some men just want to see the world burn," the quote about the Joker in the Batman Dark Knight movie. Okay, at any rate, so this newsletter is called Tales from the Jar Side. I'm supposed to be talking about Java, and I'm even a Java champion, so I'm supposed to be advocating for Java. You might be wondering why I didn't say anything about the release of Java 20 when it came out. And I'll just basically show you. See, here is the official page at openjdk.org for Java 20. And this lists all the so-called JEPs, the Java enhancement proposals that have been accepted for that output. And if you look at this, you see the word incubator, preview, 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 incubator, incubator on every single one of the accepted JEPs. So in other words, if you're not interested in incubators or preview features, there's nothing here. There's no reason to adopt Java 20. Now, you have the usual arguments of, well, this is your chance to try it out and see if it works for you, and they may be able to modify it in the future. But I don't know that I really care to do that, and it would really require me to learn APIs that are then subsequently going to change, potentially. It's like, I got other things to do. Let me know when it's done, kind of thing. Now, I took a snippet of that and put it in the newsletter, and maybe that's a little extreme, but it's true. And I did take, I did my professional obligations. I read through the various topics. I attended a talk from a guy at Oracle giving us an idea about this. I even brought this up, by the way. I installed Java 20 on my machine, and things seem to be working fine. But for the general practitioner, there's no there. It's hard enough to get the Java community even to upgrade to Java 17, which is a long-term support version, much less getting companies to adopt features that have previews in them. I can't imagine anyone other than people like me who do presentations on this stuff, or people who do want to directly influence the future of those specs, to bother at all. Now, of all those specs, the one that everybody's excited about is this one on virtual threads. Although we in the Kotlin community also know that structured concurrency is going to be very important when combined with virtual threads. So the real question is, will Java 21 out this September, which is a long-term support version, will that have the final version of virtual threads in it, or release version? The indications are it will. I certainly hope so, because if not, then it'll be a minimum of another 2 years before the community itself as a whole, companies decide to adopt this. So we'll see. Of course, structured concurrency is an incubator. That's not going to be ready in time. So we'll see how it goes. At any rate, wake me in September when that comes out. Next section. Some NCAA tournament info. I've been watching a bit of the NCAA tournaments, and I mentioned I am based in Connecticut. I've lived here since I moved here for a job back in October of 1988, believe it or not, before most listeners of this podcast were born, I imagine. And here's a Google Maps showing that Connecticut is sandwiched in between New York City down here in the lower left and Boston up here in the upper right. There's Providence, the capital of Rhode Island over here, one of the very few states smaller than Connecticut. There's Springfield at Mass, etc. I live a bit southeast of Hartford, for what it's worth. Hartford, what they used to call the insurance capital of the world, but still. Any rate, what this means is that the state is pretty evenly divided sports fans wise. See, this highway going through the middle of the state actually follows the Connecticut River. And the Connecticut River really does divide us east and west, with on the west side, you get Yankees fans and Giants fans, and even Knicks fans. On the right here, you'll get Patriots fans and Red Sox fans and Celtics fans. So the professional sports teams get divided up pretty evenly, although I did mention there's some Mets or Nets fans scattered around kind of randomly. The one thing, however, that everyone in this state agrees on is UConn basketball, University of Connecticut basketball. The men's team seems to be like really, really good every once in a while, and it's usually unexpected. They have a huge year. When I moved here, they had never really won much of anything. They made the NIT tournament and did well there, but they really weren't an NCAA fixture. But when Jim Calhoun came, he built a real program, and they started doing really, really well. I found this signed photo that a friend of mine got for me for my 30th birthday. So this is a long time ago, back in 1992, I think. So it said, "To Ken, happy 30th, all my best, Jim Calhoun." I actually did meet him once in a restaurant. Some friends of mine knew him, and I got a chance to say hi. And I know I have a picture, but I can't find it anywhere. So I included this one. Any rate, there was a story here about how at the end of the 1990 Dream season, the first season when they were just rolling through the NCAA tournament, doing beautifully, my wife and I went up to the brand new Gamble Pavilion, the stadium on the UConn campus, to watch a broadcast of their game against Clemson in the Sweet 16. The place was full of fans who wanted to watch. We were there when Scott Burrell hit a long pass from the baseline to Tate George, who did a turnaround and hit a jump shot as time expired to beat Clemson and win by 1. It was incredible. We were jumping up and down. It was so much fun. Even though in the Elite Eight, they wound up losing to Duke in overtime, which was kind of depressing. Christian Laettner and everything. But nevertheless, it was still really fun. But they actually won the title at 1999 and 2004 and 2011 and even 2014. They've won 4 times since that event. I mean, in this century, which is really impressive. And I got to say, each one of those titles was unexpected. They were not expected to be the best team in the tournament. They just happened to get on a roll and do really well. So that brings me to the real UConn basketball team, which is the women's team, the juggernaut under Gino Auriemma. The women's team is famous. I mean, they have been absolutely phenomenal since the early 90s, around 1990. I just mentioned a few stars. Rebecca Lobo is still very visible on television. Nikisha Sales, Jen Rosati, Svetlana Abrosimova. That's how I learned to pronounce that properly. And Sveta is an abbreviation for Svetlana. I didn't even know that until she was here. Shea Ralph, Sue Bird, of course, going to be a Hall of Famer. Maya Moore, Brianna Stewart, many others, with the champion, the ultimate one being Diana Taurasi, who may be one of the top 2 or 3 players ever to play the women's game. And the 4 years that she was at UConn, they won the title all 4 years. It was amazing. Some of them she carried. The best team, and the long winning streaks. I forgot to mention that, or almost forgot here. The women's team had 2 of the longest winning streaks in basketball history. Men's, women's, or anybody. They won 111 games in a row from 2014 to 2017. I mean, seriously, that's NCAA tournaments back to back to back and everything. After winning 90 in a row from 2008 to 2010, which people thought would never be touched again. Of all those teams, I think my favorite, or the one that I really remember, is the one from 2001 to 2002. That may have been the best team ever and may never be approached again. Sue Bird was leader of that team, and Swin Cash also, Aisha Jones, Tamika Williams. They were all 4 seniors, and Diana Taurasi was a sophomore on that team. And they just destroyed every opponent they faced. Most games were over well before halftime, which that was kind of boring, but boy, it was fun to watch them play. I mean, it was boring because then they'd all come out and even the scrubs were great. They won every game in the tournament. They went 39-0. They even won the title game by 12. And that was the only tournament game that was closer than 20. It was just incredible. When the WNBA draft came up for those 4 seniors, they were drafted numbers 1, 2, 4, and 6, just to give you an idea how powerful they were. And of course, Taurasi was the sophomore. So, oh my goodness. This is why it's been very strange this year to see the men doing so well and the women were eliminated. They actually lost in the Sweet 16. Which, yeah, they had a lot of injuries and everything, but prior, ever since 2007, they've been in the Final Four every year. So it's just amazing to see them lose out like that. I mean, it was all legitimate and worthy, but wow. So this time tonight, I'll be watching the men, see if they can win the title, which good luck. I mean, that'd be wonderful, but we'll see. Now, I brought this up because yesterday, the day the newsletter went out, was the day to watch Caitlin Clark at Iowa. Probably the best women's player since Diana Taurasi. And that's not putting down any of the great players who've come out of the women's game. And in Connecticut, we know women's basketball. That's my point. And it's just been really fun watching Caitlin Clark play. She's a better shooter than Taurasi. She's amazing, has Steph Curry-like range, and is much faster. I mean, when she runs, she's really fast. Taurasi was an amazing rebounder. They both have amazing instincts. They almost always make the right play. They make excellent passes, although it looks like Caitlin Clark's a little loose with the ball, much the way Steph Curry tends to be. I don't know if there's any significance to that. At any rate, I tried to watch them, and I watched them occasionally, but women's basketball just doesn't get the same audience on TV, or didn't. It did this year. So I was looking forward to watching it, and of course, what happened was I put in the highlights from when Iowa won the Final Four round to get into the finals over an undefeated South Carolina team that I really thought was going to just march to the title. And then they faced LSU for the national championship. Now, she scored her 30, which was impressive, but they all missed a lot of shots. And sorry about that, LSU was just white hot, especially in the first half, especially that girl, was it Jasmine Carson, just hit everything. It was a dream game for her coming off the bench. The only thing that was sad about it is the officiating was just terrible on both sides. I mean, they clearly weren't favoring one over the other. They were terrible on both sides, and therefore many of the players played much of the game in bad foul trouble, and one at least fouled out. So that really put a damper on it, left a really bad taste in my mouth. But nevertheless, the LSU team was clearly better on that day, and they deserved their victory. But okay, let me move on. Hey, I wrote a joke. Most of the jokes I borrow or collect. This one I wrote. Here it is. I told my wife that by definition, all her stories are old wives' tales. She then told me the one about the husband who thought he was so funny, he wound up sleeping on the couch. Sadly, I was already quite familiar with that one. And wait a minute, I need my... There's the rim shot. I thought it was kind of funny. I liked it. My wife thought it was amusing, she thought it was okay. My son really didn't think any of my gags were funny this week. I mean, he's my official social media consultant, and he was somewhat underwhelmed by the gags. But what are you going to do? Maybe it's a generational thing. Speaking of gags, let's move on to the tweets and toots. Now, I did put in a story here. Earlier this week, I got locked out of Twitter for a couple of days. After we recorded the Groovy Podcast, I post that on its own dedicated Twitter feed called @Groovy Podcast. And in order to do that, I had to log out of my regular account and then log back in under Groovy Podcast. And as soon as I did, it said, hey, you want to set up two-factor authentication, because it had been a while since I'd done that. And I wanted, of course, they no longer allowed the SMS style. They wanted the Google Authenticator or whatever the external authenticator was. So I went ahead and set it up, and then I posted the podcast. And when I logged out and tried to log back in under my regular account, it said, okay, what's the number generated by your authenticator? And I opened up my Google Authenticator app and there was no entry for Twitter other than the one I just added for the Groovy Podcast. I don't know what happened to it. There must have been there. I've used it before, but again, it's been months and months, so I couldn't get in. There were some things I could have done had I not also logged out on the mobile app. And I wound up logging out on the mobile app because I tried to change my password thinking that would reset things, which was the wrong thing to do because all it did was reset my password and then get stuck at the same authenticator again. So I sent them a message and I didn't have high hopes. They did get back to me. They got back to me with some frequently asked question lists, which were useless. And then with a couple of email exchanges, they even told me to log in and then they would detect the event of me trying to log in and then go fix it or turn off two-factor authentication. And never got back to me after an hour. The next day we went through it again, but finally I got them to turn it off and then I was able to get back in. So at any rate, it was an adventure. Let's move on. April Fools. I expressed this because there was a distinct lack of April Fool's jokes in my Twitter feed, which is fine. I mean, a lot of those gags are not funny, and especially if they punch down, I don't really like them. I did, however, say this. I said, this is the first April Fool's since Elon purchased Twitter. And of course, he has demonstrated over and over again, he thinks he's a lot funnier than he actually is. I mean, I was even thinking about him carrying in that sink on his first day as CEO of Twitter and calling himself Chief Twit and everything. The guy's just not funny, and he thinks he is. His sense of humor is appalling. So I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I figured he would do something particularly idiotic, and it never came. Even the people who are supposed to lose their blue check marks on April 1st didn't lose them. What eventually seemed to happen late in the day is that the message associated with verification said, oh, this person is either a Twitter Blue subscriber or has a legacy verification, which is meaningless. It means that it was already getting meaningless, but that's like either this is somebody you can trust or it isn't. Oh, thanks. That's really helpful. Sooner or later, this thing's going under. I'm surprised it's lasted this long. We'll see. I'm still here. We'll see how it goes. This was an interesting tweet that I put under the category of trans rights. This was somebody tweeting about an old Star Trek Next Generation episode, the one where Data created a daughter. It was actually the name of the episode was called Offspring, Season 3, Episode 16. And there's a quote that said, I've decided to allow my child to choose its own sex and appearance, which was interesting. Now, of course, it's not the same because there wasn't at all a sex or appearance. So, okay, for the robot, when the android, when he first created, I'm going to say her because that's what she wound up becoming. But still, it was a nicely relevant given today's work. I still go with the trans rights are in fact human rights. Here was a dad joke that I thought was pretty good. My wife said to me, if you won the lottery, would you still love me? And the answer is, of course I would. I'd miss you, but I'd still love you. Oh, wait a minute. My wife liked that gag better than the one I picked, so maybe I should have put that in the subtitle. So be it. This one was fun with Unicode. Head of the Groovy project, Paul King, put this nice little program together. It's a Groovy script that used Unicode, so it was able to use a handshake or wave icon and a globe icon in order to write a hello world program. He wrote a get method to return world and a wave method that took a name and responded with hello. So he was able to invoke that method, the wave method, with the globe, and that printed out hello world, and there's the script. And I thought that was very fun. It's clever. So it's a hello world program with icons in it that are, well, I suppose emojis might be a better term, that are available because, like most programming languages these days, Groovy supports Unicode. Little item on good old Tungsten Arm O'Doyle baseball card. That somebody actually put together a baseball card for Tungsten Arm O'Doyle of the Akron Groomsmen. And if you have no idea what that's about, that's another reference to a classic tweet that is becoming common knowledge in the baseball community, especially among baseball writers that I follow. That old tweet from back in 2021, not that old, but a couple of years ago, said, every time I see an Angels, California Angels highlight, or Anaheim Angels, I guess now, it's like Mike Trout hit 3 home runs and raised his average to 528, while Shohei Ohtani did something that hasn't been done since Tungsten Arm O'Doyle of the 1921 Akron Groomsmen, as the Tigers defeated the Angels 8-3. And that, of course, went viral. You could see even it's got 58,000 likes, and it's a baseball tweet. That's impressive. The Angels on opening day let Ohtani pitch, and I know he hit as well. He pitched 6 shutout innings and with 10 strikeouts. And of course, the Angels gave up 2 runs in the 8th and lost 2-1 anyway. That's Tungsten Arm O'Doyle in a nutshell. This one was Child of the Lizard King with a paid blue check. You could still impersonate anyone until Twitter shuts down your account, which they eventually get around to. This person tweeted as Elon Musk's mother, saying, I tried. Okay, I really did try. Perhaps I failed as a mother, but I'd like to see anyone start with Elon and produce better results. The arguments of nature versus nurture are invalid when you have a child with a lizard king. I don't know where that came from, but hey, it was funny. Okay, this one was not today, Satan, and had a picture of a calendar saying, nope, not today, Satan, on Wednesday and Thursday, but on Friday, hang with Satan and meet at the fiery pits and burn some stuff, you know. And pretty clever. I thought that was funny. My son liked that one. That was one he enjoyed. Okay, great. I have to force this on him, by the way. He doesn't subscribe, and he doesn't read it, and he doesn't even listen to the video, even though part of the reason I make these videos is for his generation, because they tend to prefer watching videos to reading, supposedly. But he won't do it. Oh, well. The one comment on the upcoming Trump indictment, which is supposed to come this week, we'll see, was this one that said... this person was responding to a lawyer, Terry Canfield is a lawyer on Mastodon. He said, just try to read him his Miranda rights without bursting out laughing. I thought that was very, very good. This one said, tip for the day was any email from a colleague you don't like the contents of, just reply with unsubscribe. It's comically passive aggressive. And I thought that was very clever. Again, my son didn't like that for some reason. No, that's bad. Yeah. And then the final one was this great idea of a collective noun. Why isn't a fleet of helicopters just called helicopters? And I think that's great. I plan to use that in the future. So wonderful. So have a great week, everybody. For the record, I taught the week 3 of Spring and Spring Boot on the O'Reilly platform this week and did the Groovy Podcast. Next week, I have week 1 of my Android development bootcamp. That's another in 3 weeks thing on the platform. And this is the week of the Big Dev Nexus conference in Atlanta. And even though I'm not actually scheduled to give any talks, I just didn't get my act together in time to put in some proposals. I did manage to get a pass so that I could go attend and see all the people and say hi. If you're a jarhead, please feel free to come up and say hi and let me know. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody down there. So thank you very much for coming. Feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I will see you all next week. Take care.